In the grand game for the throne of Grey Castle, two royal siblings embody a brutal dichotomy of power. From the port of clear water, Princess Garcia Wimbledon reveals the terrifying depth of her 5-year gambit. Her black sail fleet isn't for trade, it's a pirate navy in waiting, built on a philosophy of ruthless investment and future conquest. Her failed attempt to poison her brother Roland wasn't just a misstep. It was a casual display of lethality, proving she's not playing the governance game her father intended. Meanwhile, in the forsaken border town, Roland is playing an entirely different game. The supposed royal failure is desperately trying to reinvent civilization, starting with cement. His secret weapon isn't alchemy, but a radical humanism. He's allied with the witch Anna, seeing her power not as demonic, but as the very engine for a new era. Just as his grand vision is stymied by practical realities, fate delivers a master stonemason who, in a stunning twist, is Anna's former teacher. While Garcia plots war with warships and assassins, Roland is building a future where society's most feared outcasts become its salvation. Your Highness, what are the planned dimensions for the city wall? The voice was professional and direct. At least 15 feet high and 6 feet wide, Roland answered firmly, wide enough for 4 men to march abreast. He nodded to himself, appreciating the man's straightforwardness. Professionals, he thought, were a different breed entirely. They established the technical requirements first, and then determined the means of construction. Carl's mind was already racing. That would require a trench 1 man deep just to stabilize the foundation. He calculated aloud. And for a 15-foot wall with a 6-foot wide top, the base would need to be at least double that width. He paused, the project's immense scope settling in. The excavation alone will consume a great deal of manpower, Your Highness. He continued, give me 150 men, and I should be able to dig the trench in the months before the demons arrive. A trench will not stop the demonic beasts, Roland stated, his tone noncommittal. True, Carl conceded, but building the upper section with stone masonry would take 3 years. To simply halt the beasts, the wall needn't be so high. 12 feet should suffice. Warming to his revised plan, he added, the width could also be reduced by a third, giving us a 6-foot wide foundation. If we dig the trench and build the wall concurrently and increase workforce to 200, I could finish it by January, before the demons arrive. Carl paused, his expression turning serious. Please forgive me, Your Highness, but this is a poor time to begin. If the wall construction falls behind schedule, the trenches won't hold. The soaking rain and snow of winter will cause them to collapse. When you return, you would have to expend more time and manpower just to clear out the mud. Roland considered this, and if we build the wall to a height of 12 feet and a width of 4, how long would the excavation take then? It could be finished within a month and a half, Carl replied. Then proceed with that plan, Roland commanded, raising a hand to forestall any further objections. Trenching and masonry will proceed simultaneously. We will finish a month before the demonic beasts arrive. He leaned forward slightly. I understand your concerns, but I want you to look at this. It's the latest creation from the Grey Castle alchemical workshop. Roland hadn't allowed the stonemason to witness the actual bonding process. Instead, he simply produced 2 red bricks that had already been joined together, appearing as a single, solid block. When a prince spoke, few dared to question him. As Roland explained that this alchemical adhesive, this cement, could solidify from a liquid overnight and form an unbelievably strong bond, Carl's face became a mask of shock. His eyes, so accustomed to judging stone, widened in disbelief. As a man who had dedicated half his life to masonry, he instantly grasped the implications. He saw how revolutionary this invention was. It wasn't merely about binding stones, it was about shaping them. The liquid could be poured into any form, meaning no more secondary cutting or laborious polishing. It could bind any loosely shaped stone, completely eliminating the most time-consuming part of construction. The speed of building would be elevated to a level he had never imagined. The thought alone was enough to make his heart hammer against his ribs. Seeing the dawning comprehension on Karl's face, Roland smiled. "So," he asked, his voice quiet but confident, "what do you think? Will 3 months be enough?" Karl van Bart's voice trembled slightly. "If what you say is true, if the alchemical workshop's claims are accurate, then I am willing to try." "Excellent," Roland laughed, the sound echoing his confidence. "I will have someone prepare a summary of the detailed information on the cement for you. Any other needs can be discussed with my assistant minister." He met the stonemason's gaze. "Mr. Karl, as of this moment, you are the chief of the Masonry Guild." The following afternoon, Roland met Nonna for the first time. The little girl stood in the backyard, staring blankly at Anna. Her hands twisted the hem of her dress for a long moment before she finally whispered, her voice barely a breath, "Am I dead?" Roland had to admit that a witch's power was more than just magic. It transformed their very appearance, their presence. Though she and Anna were different, they both possessed a unique, captivating charm. It had nothing to do with age or circumstance. Even locked in a cell awaiting execution, Anna's radiance had been undeniable. He searched his memory. From the most refined noble ladies to the common streetwalkers of Greycastle, none possessed such an aura. Comparing ordinary women to a witch, he mused, was like comparing a black and white photograph to a world bursting with color. The witches were the color. Karl van Bart had brought the girl. After a slight bow, he tactfully departed, leaving Roland, Anna, and Nonna alone in the sun-dappled yard. Roland suppressed a smile. "You're not dead," he said gently, "and Anna is alive and well. I am the 4th Prince, Roland Wimbledon, and you are—" "Nonna Payen," she answered. Relief washed over her, and her expression brightened. Forgetting the prince entirely, she rushed to Anna's side, a torrent of questions and chatter pouring out of her. Roland didn't mind. He leaned against a round table, poured himself a mug of ale, and watched the scene unfold. Anna was clearly the calmer of the two, offering a single, quiet word for every 10 that tumbled from Nonna. Though only 17, Anna already possessed the reassuring presence of an older sister. When she truly grows up, Roland thought, how remarkable will she be? When Nonna's breathless chatter finally began to slow, Roland coughed gently. "Miss Payen," he asked, "I heard from your teacher that you have awakened as a witch." Most people use the term fallen. Roland preferred awakened. He wasn't so naive as to believe all witches were saints. A wicked person would only cause greater destruction with such power. A weapon could be used for violence, but it could also be used to resist it. The person who wielded it was what mattered. Perhaps the church's propaganda, the stories of massacres, were based on fact, but to use that as justification to condemn an entire people was the greatest injustice of all. At his words, Nonna stiffened. "Will you hang me?" she whispered. "No, of course not," Roland said softly. "The gallows are for heinous criminals. You are not a criminal, and neither is Miss Anna. You have nothing to fear." She took a shaky breath and nodded. "I'm not sure. My teacher said witches are tricked by the devil to gain evil powers. Am I possessed? I've never even seen the devil." Roland asked gently, "When did you first realize you had become different?" "About a week ago," Inanna muttered. "I saw a bird with a broken leg, and I just wanted to help it." She hesitated. "And then I felt something flow from my hands." "Flowing from your hands," Roland prompted, leaning forward slightly. "What happened then?" She tilted her head, remembering it. It enclosed the bird, like a sticky bubble of water. She looked up, her eyes wide with the memory. "And then the bird's leg was healed." Healing, Roland's heart began to race. In an age without antibiotics or modern medicine, a simple infection could be a death sentence. A deep cut or a broken bone could easily lead to the grave. The power to rapidly heal wounds was the power to save lives. It might not advance civilization, but for an individual, it was nothing short of a miracle. Urgency coiled in his gut. He went to the door and found a knight. "Bring me a living chicken," he commanded. If Nana's ability was real, it could be the key to changing how the people of this border town saw witches, the key to ending their ruthless persecution. After the knight hurried away, Roland returned to the table. He looked at the small, nervous girl. "If you can heal animals, why would you still believe witches are evil?" Nana's voice was a whisper. "My teacher said witches can do things ordinary people can't. Sometimes it doesn't look bad, but that's just the devil's trick, a ruse to lure more people in." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear. "I've never seen the devil, I swear it." "Of course you haven't," Roland said gently. "That is just one of the church's lies. Your teacher was deceived, just like so many others." Nana gasped. "The church? Lies? But why?" Roland shook his head, not attempting an explanation. How could she understand? In the infancy of civilization, people needed a scapegoat for the famines and plagues they couldn't explain. Throughout history, that blame had so often fallen upon women. In this world, where witches possessed powers of unknown origin, they were the perfect target. The church had faced a choice: declare the witches saints, their powers a gift from God, or hunt them down as servants of the devil. The first path would have diminished their own authority. A witch's power had nothing to do with the church. If other faiths also recognized these women as saints, then whose God was the one, true God? Monotheism could not allow such a question. When divinity was based on icons and hearsay, one could not afford to share power. You had to claim to be the only true faith and eliminate all others. So they chose to destroy the witches. It had nothing to do with good or evil. It was about power. A commotion at the door announced the knight's return. He held a chicken by its wings, the bird kicking and squawking in protest. What happened next left Nana speechless. Roland drew a slim silver knife from his belt. As the knight held the struggling bird firmly on the table, Roland made a swift, precise incision in its leg. Blood welled from the cut. He gestured to Nana. "Heal it." With a cold, detached focus, he tested the limits of her ability again and again. When the chicken finally lay limp and still on the blood-stained table, Roland had a much clearer understanding of Nana's power. She could restore damaged tissue, mend cuts in the flesh, knit fractured bones, and soothe away bruises. She could not, however, regenerate a missing part of the body. When he severed one of the chicken's feet, she was unable to grow a new one. She could, however, perfectly reattach the severed limb, her magic making the break vanish as if it had never been. And finally, he learned she could not reverse death. Once life had fled the chicken's body, her magic was useless. Throughout the gruesome process, Roland never saw the sticky bubble of water Nana had described. She simply placed her small hand over a wound, and at a speed visible to the naked eye, the flesh would stitch itself back together. After healing wound after wound, Nana showed little sign of fatigue. She wasn't sweating or panting, not drained of energy like Anna was after using her fire. Only Nana was dissatisfied. Feeling it was cruel to treat the chicken that way, she continued to stare at Roland with wide, accusing eyes long after the experiments were over. Roland sighed. "Stop staring and eat something." He resorted to his secret weapon, ordering a servant to bring out afternoon tea. A tray laden with fresh pastries, still warm from the ovens, soon filled the air with a buttery scent. The tactic had proven effective on Anna, and he wagered few girls their age could resist such a temptation. He was right. Nana's resolve crumbled at the sight of the desserts. After the last crumb was gone, Roland sent Nana on her way. Anna watched her leave, then turned to him, her expression puzzled. "Why didn't you make her stay? She's a witch, like me." "She still has a family," Roland explained, "and they don't know what she is, not yet. It's only a matter of time, Anna whispered. Yes, sooner or later, Roland sighed. For her sake, I hope it's later. Do you, miss your father? She shook her head, her expression as placid as a still lake. The betrayal had clearly left a wound too deep for words. But even without family, she still had a friend. Nana will be a frequent visitor, Roland said. I intend to have her come every 2 days to train her ability. At this, Anna's eyes brightened, and she nodded quickly. Do you want to go back to school with her? He asked, to learn with the other children. Anna didn't answer, but he could feel the longing in her silence. This won't last, Roland said, his voice firm. As long as I'm here, you will one day live as ordinary people do. You won't be hunted. You won't be sent to the gallows. That day will come. He looked directly at her. I promise. With Karl van Bart managing the construction of the wall, Prince Roland suddenly found himself with time to spare. He spent his afternoons in the castle garden, overseeing the witches' training. Anna's progress was remarkable. She no longer needed extra layers of clothing for protection and could now move with skill and grace, a small, perfectly controlled flame dancing on each fingertip without ever singeing her pointed hat. Nana was also given a witch's uniform. Though she was reluctant to practice her healing, the promise of afternoon tea was usually enough to coax her into compliance, pouting all the while. Watching the two of them in the yard, one a flicker of controlled fire, the other a reluctant healer, brought a smile to Roland's face. Occasionally, he would ride to the foot of North Slope Mountain to check on the wall's progress. After more than 2 weeks of relentless work, 100 meters of the city wall stood complete. Lacking proper surveying tools, Karl had devised a clever workaround. His craftsmen planted wooden stakes along the planned route, and, by measuring the sun's shadow at the same time each day, ensured the wall remained perfectly straight. A viewing tower reinforced the structure at every 10th marker. Such a large-scale project naturally caught the attention of the town's nobility, but aside from gleaning a few details from Barov, they made no move. They watched from a distance, as if the fate of Border Town had nothing to do with them. Roland didn't mind. Their family businesses and true interests were all in Longsong's stronghold. They would certainly not risk their lives to help him. He could almost hear the sound of their laughter as they ridiculed his efforts in their private halls. The merchants were no different. In previous years, the fur traders would have already packed up and returned to the stronghold, their purchasing done for the season. They vented their discontent over the poor trade on the town's new ruler. News traveled up and down the Redwater River. The fourth prince, Roland Wimbledon, was building a wall right before the months of the demons. The story was passed along with shaking heads and knowing smirks, a tale of a foolish, ignorant prince. No one believed he could protect the town. After all, Prince Roland lacked the reputation of a courageous fighter. They were all simply waiting for him to finally accept the inevitable and retreat, tail between his legs, to the safety of the stronghold. As the town whispered and speculated, Roland welcomed the first bite of winter. In his office, a fire roared in the hearth, its heat pushing back the chill that seeped through the cracks in the doors and windows. Above the huge stone mantel hung the skull of a deer, its long horns reaching like skeletal branches. In the flickering glow, their shadows writhed on the wall behind them, twisting into monstrous claws and teeth. A long, deep-red wooden table covered in parchments and books stood before him. Most were simple orders, requiring only his signature. He had once used the room only for official work, but since transforming the single large chamber into a proper 3-room office, he had grown to love the space. From the windows at the end of the hall, the town spread out below, and on the horizon, the endless, impassable mountains stood like a wall, separating the kingdom of Greycastle from the wild lands. Beyond the northern slope, where the mine was located, was but a single pass in that vast range. He could see the wood, fenced garden where Anna practiced. He'd had the old brick pool filled in and replaced with a long stone table, a convenient spot for their afternoon tea. On a good day, he could go down and bask in the sun, perhaps even nap on the custom-made rocking chair. It was a small garden, but it was his. In his former life, the chance to even sit on the steps of a real castle was an impossible dream. One had to buy a ticket just to look around. Now he had his own castle and a town to go with it. A knock at the door broke his reverie. It was Barav, his assistant minister, holding a parchment covered in figures. "Your Highness," Barav said, handing the report to Roland, "our recent expenditures on tradesmen and handymen for the wall have been considerable. If this continues, I'm afraid the treasury won't last until spring." Border Town's economy was simple. Its only real income came from the ore and precious stones of the North Slope mine, an income entirely controlled by Longsong Stronghold. The mine's output was traded directly for wheat and bread, tax-free, with the nobles of the stronghold presiding over the entire exchange. The mine was, in essence, a joint stock venture owned by Longsong's nobility. The nobles stationed in Border Town were merely temporary custodians, shareholders watching over their investment. Their true homes and fiefdoms lay mostly to the east of the stronghold. They rotated through this post, a different group cycling in each year. In fact, Border Town itself was less than 30 years old. Compared to Longsong's stronghold, which had stood for nearly 2 centuries, it was a newborn. Duke Ryan had only ever intended to build an outpost here, an early warning system against an invasion of demonic beasts. He never expected the pioneers he sent would discover a rich vein of ore in the northern slope. A settlement grew around the mine, and they called it Border Town. To prevent theft, the Duke refused to allow other nobles to send their own men, instead employing local residents and even criminals as miners. Everyone was paid in food, their share proportional to the amount of ore their household produced. The stronghold provided just enough food to sustain the town and paid its employees a small, fixed fee, regardless of the mine's output. Of the 2,000 people living in Border Town, more than half worked for the mine. The town's other industries, the blacksmith, the tavern, the weaver, provided a modest revenue, but it was never enough to create a surplus. The lord appointed to govern Border Town had never taken his duties seriously. In fact, he had remained in the stronghold ever since Roland's arrival from Greycastle, never once returning to his post. Consequently, Roland had to pay for the wall's construction from his own pocket. The man he used to be would never have considered such an expense. But the Roland of today knew that gaining a firm foothold in this town was worth every coin he possessed. He also knew that once he broke the stronghold's monopoly, the town's income would become a steady river, not a mere trickle. The question was how. Longsong's stronghold would not relinquish its control of the trade easily. Prying it from their grasp would be like stealing food from a tiger's den. Yet Barov's data was clear. The mine was inefficient, and the ore's transportation was slow and difficult. Its annual output was worth over 1,000 gold royals, but to the stronghold as a whole, this was a mere drop in the bucket. The only ones who truly profited were the small circle of aristocrats who had invested in it. For Border Town to survive long-term, that income had to be recovered. Roland knew the nobles would never let it go, even if they had already recouped their investment tenfold. A mosquito is small, but it is still meat, and this was a source of revenue they could exploit without lifting a finger. His plan was to offer them compensation, perhaps by purchasing the ore at a reduced price. But the current arrangement, trading a full ship of precious ore for half a ship of grain, was a form of blatant theft he would not allow to continue. Barov watched as Roland stared down at the list of figures, lost in thought. Over the past 3 months, or more accurately, in the last month alone, an inexplicable change had come over the fourth prince. Outsiders might still be uncertain, but as the prince's constant companion, Barov had witnessed the transformation firsthand. Back in Greycastle, the fourth Prince, Roland Wimbledon, was known only for his abysmal reputation. He was headstrong and unscrupulous, utterly lacking in aristocratic dignity. He never committed any truly disastrous errors, only a long, unceasing string of minor ones. Compared to his two older brothers, he was a world apart. When His Majesty had sent him to Border Town, Barov had been filled with a sinking disappointment. If the king hadn't promised him the position of finance minister following the succession, he would have resigned long ago. For the first 2 months, the prince had been every bit as childish as his reputation suggested, managing to offend the local nobility time and again. Fortunately, the town was so small that even after the nobles abandoned their posts, Barov was able to keep things running with a dozen hired civilians. But then something had changed. When did it happen? Barov wondered, his eyes narrowing in concentration. When did he become so different? He searched his memory, replaying the events of the past weeks, and then it came to him. It was after he saved the witch. That was when everything began to change. Barov didn't truly believe the old tales. The notion of the devil possessing a man's body, or a hidden witch manipulating the prince, seemed preposterous. If demonic forces possessed such power, why waste it on the fourth prince? Surely the king himself, or even the pope, would be a more strategic target. A final, irrefutable fact dispelled any lingering doubt. Barov had seen the prince hold the god's punishment lock with his own eyes. The church's ultimate weapon against witches, a holy relic before which any demon's power was meant to crumble, had no effect on Roland. If this man was not the fourth prince, but some entity immune to such power, then exposing him would be folly. Self-preservation, after all, was paramount. The prince's methods remained the same. He still did as he pleased, acting with an unscrupulous air, and yet the feeling he projected was entirely different. It was, Barov realized, the polar opposite of before. The crucial difference was purpose. The old Roland had been reckless for the sake of recklessness. The new Roland was driven by a clear objective. To achieve his goals, he employed methods that were unconventional, to say the least. Take his insistence on saving the witch. The strategy itself had seemed ill-conceived, but there had been a strategy nonetheless. And the prince had believed in its success with an unshakable, almost unnerving certainty. That unwavering belief was the greatest puzzle. The crown would pass to one of Roland's siblings, never to him. Everyone knew that, so what hope could he possibly have of developing a forgotten speck like Border Town? It was a task beyond even the gods. And yet here he was, pursuing this insane plan to build a wall and fend off the demonic beasts. Did he really, truly believe it could succeed? A simple madman would be easy to dismiss, but this Roland, the man who so vigorously pushed for the wall's construction, did not seem mad. He genuinely intended to defend the town. He was staking everything on an alchemical product called cement, a material no one had ever heard of. By any measure of common sense, the venture was impossible. Barov's own family employed an alchemist, yet he'd never heard of any workshop producing such a substance. The prince's entire scheme hinged on something utterly unknown. Was it supreme confidence or reckless madness? How far did the prince's ambitions reach? How much of his grand design remained hidden? For the first time in a long time, Barov found himself genuinely curious to see what the coming days would bring.